Marcus. Thank you so much. There are tough decisions in this job, but hiring you was not one of them. We're delighted to have you, and I'm glad you told that story about Father Malloy and Father Hesburgh, because I can claim that I closed the deal after others just softened the ground. But it really is a great blessing for Notre Dame to have Marcus's heart, his spirit, his intellect, and his leadership at Notre Dame. You just feel an energy around the law school and around him because of his leadership and the conviction and determination he brings. It's just a joy to work with him, and we're grateful for his presence. And I also have to join in acknowledging Matt and Lindsay Maroon here, our friends, whose generosity made this initiative possible at Notre Dame. They are good friends, Notre Dame parents, and just so supportive of what we are doing. You know, I'm daily aware here at Notre Dame, you know, Marcus said we're to be a force for good, that whatever good we do can only be done because of the generosity and support of people like Matt and Lindsay. So thank you very much for making this possible. You know, I believe this Religious Liberty Initiative is emblematic of the kind of scholarship and service Notre Dame should offer the world. The Congregation of Holy Cross, of which I'm a member, and some of the other priests here are, that founded Notre Dame, emerged in the 19th century in the wake of the often violent anti-clerical tendencies of the French Revolution that destroyed much of the educational, the parochial, and the medical infrastructure that served the people. Father Moreau, the founder of Holy Cross, wanted the congregation's sisters, brothers, and priests to work to rebuild those ministries that serve the people. Eventually, he sent Father Edward Sorin, along with Holy Cross sisters, brothers, and priests, to this country, to the United States, to continue these ministerial efforts here. Father Sorin quickly fell in love with America and was proud to be an American citizen. Yet he and his companions often encountered anti-immigrant and anti-Catholic attitudes in this country. He responded neither with despair nor anger, but simply devoted his life to building a great university that would be at the same time grounded in genuine faith and fully American. It was the principles of this nation that allowed him to do that. And I see the Religious Liberty Initiative as a continuation of that work of showing that we can be fully religious and fully members of this great nation. You know, religious freedom is an abstraction to people like me and many of us who haven't felt the authorities directing or controlling or restricting our religious expression. I found that out in March of 2005 on a visit to China when I was taking a tour of the Catholic Cathedral in Beijing, the Cathedral of the Immaculate Conception, which is the latest church built on property that has had a Catholic church for 400 years, the first being the Chapel of Matteo Ricci. It's a quiet, contemplative space, and one can't but be impressed by the faith of those who come and worship there. My guide, who was a priest at the cathedral there, took me around and pointed out various parts of this well-kept, beautiful church. At a particular place in the aisle of the church, he pointed to me the spot where a nun was beaten to death during the Cultural Revolution. The consequences of that Cultural Revolution were still evident in the contemporary Chinese Catholic Church as that dark period removed a generation of Catholic leaders, and it is still felt as they lack leaders and models in their seminaries to teach and to continue the work of the church. As we continued our conversation, the priest related to me in a matter-of-fact way how he navigates the government regulations daily to establish churches, to worship, and to educate clergy. It seems the cruelty of the Cultural Revolution has, at least for the Catholics in Beijing, been replaced by a thicket of rules and a team of bureaucrats regulating religious expression. As the priest related it, he did not encounter hostility from the government ministers from whom he had to seek approval, but rather just a good deal of red tape. The lives of my friends and fellow Catholics in Beijing are not remotely like what the Muslims are facing in the west of China, as Nuri Turkel painfully understands. But the brutality meted out to the Muslims and the restrictions placed on Christians and Catholics are both born of a government that is anxious about religion and its competing vision, its compelling purpose, its emphasis on truth, love, virtue, morality, divinity, all of which can be impediments to the unfettered exercise of state power. In January of 2007, I visited Uganda. There I heard of a very different phenomenon with respect to religion. The nation had struggled with the atrocities perpetrated by and political destabilization created by the Lord's Resistance Army, headed by Joseph Kony. Originally, Kony's group was part of a movement to champion the Koli people of northern Uganda, establish a multi-party democracy, and rule according to the Ten Commandments. However, when the movement was vanquished militarily, Kony attracted soldiers from the previous movement and combined them with his troops. While continuing to employ Christian language, the LRS became an insurgent military group lacking either clear political goals, but was responsible for atrocities against civilians, multiple human rights violations, abductions, child sex slavery, and forcing young people to serve as soldiers. Despite the heinous character of its action, it retained a religious patina in describing these terrible activities. These experiences led me to reflect on the power of religious beliefs, practices, and institutions. On one hand, the People's Republic of China, the most populous, among the wealthiest, and most powerful nations in the world today, has found it necessary to try to extinguish, or in other cases, tightly control, the practice of religion in its land. Whatever else one may say, they perceive religious expression as a serious threat. On the other hand, the so-called Lord's Resistance Army, a band of inhumane criminals, takes on religious imagery and terminology as cover for their evil. Clearly, the LRA is an extreme example of an attempt to co-opt religious language, images, and practices to serve its purposes. But history is full of more subtle efforts to co-opt religious belief and practice to serve the purposes of those in power. Those who co-opt know that the call of religious faith is deep and motivating. They also know that the values of religion conflict with the values of their movement, yet they strive to convince potential backers that their religious values and their political movement are harmonious when they are certainly not. What is it? What is it about religious belief and practice that makes it such a formidable foe to powerful nations that they would expend so much effort to extinguish it or control it? And what is it that makes it such a powerful force that those in power, even if their purposes are so deeply at odds with the religious message, should seek to co-opt it and clothe themselves in its language and images? For those of us with faith, the peculiar power of religious conviction does not come as a surprise. Religious convictions are central to defining our identity and forming our social networks. They shape our understanding of our highest individual good and purpose, and our understanding of what society's highest goods and purposes should be. They are the source of communal and personal challenge to do good. They console us in times of turmoil, struggle, and tragedy. The distinctive motivational power of religious convictions is perhaps most evident in the tradition of martyrdom, prominent in Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. The Book of Maccabees in the Hebrew Bible tells the story of the sons of Maccabee, who were ready to die rather than be forced by foreign occupiers to transgress the Torah. Christian martyrs, since the first martyr, St. Stephen, whose death by stoning is recounted in the Acts of the Apostles in the Christian New Testament, has been specially revered in the Christian tradition. And in Islam, a martyr or shaheed lays down his or her life, fulfilling a religious commandment as a witness to righteousness. The first Muslim martyr was a woman, Samaya bint Khayyat, who was killed in Mecca simply for being part of the new Muslim religion. It is the ultimacy of the martyr's sacrifice that makes him or her so revered in these religious traditions, for their commitment corresponds to the ultimacy of the demands that faith makes on us. The teachings of faith play a central role in defining our relationship with God, our place in the world, what we ought to do, and what we can hope for. These truths are of such transcendent importance that no other allegiance or loyalty can supersede them. When I was a freshman in high school, our English teacher had us read the play A Man for All Seasons by Robert Bolt. It's about St. Thomas More, a saint who's very significant, very important to Notre Dame's law school. This was about a play who, in the words of the author, Robert Bolt, brings about his own death because he can't put his hand on an old black book and tell an ordinary lie. It is a story about living out courageously one's religious convictions in the face of the power of the state. But it's more than that. For what makes More's life unforgettable nearly 500 years later is not only his conviction, but the way he expressed it. On his last day of life, More displayed benevolent regard for the king who ordered his death, the people who came to watch him die, the person who walked him to his execution, and the man who cut off his head. More knew the executioner's fee was a gift of the clothes of the condemned man, so he dressed for his death in the most expensive clothes he had. When prison officials objected to this extravagance, More arranged to send the executioner a gold coin. Another man who lived out his convictions till the end was Bishop James Walsh, who went to China as a Maryknoll missionary in 1918. Walsh was ordained a bishop and led the Catholic Central Bureau in Shanghai that served the country's nearly 3 million Catholics. He stayed in China even after communists came to power and pressured him and other missionaries to leave. In 1951, the communist government closed the Catholic Bureau and put Bishop Walsh under surveillance. When the Maryknoll missioners asked him about his safety if he stayed, he said, "To put up with a little inconvenience at my age is nothing, but I am sick and tired of being pushed around because of my religion." In 1958, Walsh was arrested on charges of spying and was sentenced to 20 years in prison. 12 years later, as part of a thaw in U.S.-China relations, Bishop Walsh, then 80 years old, was released and deported. The last missionary to leave China, he walked across the Lo Wu Bridge to Hong Kong, where he was met by a group of reporters eager to hear his comments on the Chinese regime. He said he had no bitterness toward his captors and said, "I love the Chinese people. If they would have me back, I would return immediately." The story of these two lives have something to teach us as we ponder religious liberty. More and Walsh were people of strong religious conviction, but their conviction was characterized by generosity of spirit that didn't slacken the power of their beliefs, but channeled it. They did not respond to hatred with hatred or oppression with a desire to oppress others. They each responded with the generous, charitable spirit. Their stories can be a helpful reminder to us in our efforts to defend religious liberty. Let us do so with unwavering conviction, but without the acrimony that characterizes so much political discussion in our time. In this regard, I recall the beloved former Notre Dame law professor, John T. Noonan, a Ronald Reagan appointee to the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, who spoke at the 2009 Notre Dame commencement about what he called the claims of conflicting consciences. By conscience, he said, we apprehend what God asks of us and what the love of our neighbor requires. You may suggest that what my conscience should say, Judge Noonan explained, but you cannot tell me what my conscience must say. That's the rub when your moral vision is clear and the other fellow's is cloudy. You become more impatient, more frustrated if the other is a friend, an old friend, or a potential friend. Why can't he or she see it? To satisfy the frustration by shunning or denouncing your unseen companion will accomplish little beyond expressing your own exasperation. Help your cause by hurting your friends? No. What does need work is prayer. What does work is prayer, patience, empathy, and the love that encircles the other person, a fellow creature attempting to do what he or she sees as right. Let us follow the examples of St. Thomas More, Bishop Walsh, and Judge Noonan in fighting the battle for religious freedom courageously and unflinchingly, but also with a generous spirit that respects and defends the conscientious decisions of all and exhibits love for all. I know the Religious Liberty Initiative will do that. As she leads our Religious Liberty Initiative, Professor Stephanie Barclay is doing remarkable work by building and joining such coalitions. We heard earlier about her work with students in representing the Apache tribe's fight to save the sacred site, Oak Flats, from becoming a copper mine. She said that the courts sometimes do not see the religious exercise and sites of indigenous people as equally important to those of Christian churches. It is a problem, she says, when we're willing to recognize the importance of religious beliefs of someone, or we're unwilling to recognize the importance of the religious beliefs of someone just because they look different from our own. As the Religious Liberty Initiative aligns us with partners across the political and religious spectrum and with peoples around the globe, the more obvious it becomes that we are not defending narrow interests, but universal human rights. And the larger we build this coalition in support of religious liberty, the easier it will be for all of us to come together in a unified voice in support of the work of Nuri Turkle and others who share his courage and his cause. And I'm proud to be present with the awarding of the Notre Dame Prize for Religious Liberty to Mr. Turkle. We honor you, Mr. Turkle, for your witness and your work. We thank you for coming to our campus to encourage us in this vital endeavor. May it inspire all of us to be advocates for those who suffer religious oppression around the world, regardless of what faith they hold. Thank you very much.